I'm thinking that there wasn't slaves in ancient Egypt. There was people that they would. There might have been prisoners from like wars and stuff that they had chained. But I'm thinking if they had citizens, if they, I don't know how wide their boundaries were in ancient Egypt. I mean, yeah, of course they got a country now, but I mean, could their boundaries been wider? And they just sent people out to collect more people. You know, they just extended their boundaries. If they ran into a village or a tribe, they just grab them, take them to the central city, say Memphis, and then they make them work there. If they were out there, they because they were claiming this area, and they didn't want uh, Sloth citizenry living in their boundaries because they were probably, you know, really prideful of having accomplished what they've accomplished, and it was like, wow, we're the modern world, so we have to make all the people within our boundaries. We got to train them and make sure they have a good work ethic, so that they know who they're living, who their king or pharaoh or whoever it was. And so they'd go out and they'd have people go out and collect people and bring them back to Central City. They'd live there, and then they just swap out citizenry. See, every 10 years, they'd swap them out, you know, put them through labor, you know, make them make sure, probably run them through all the things that they'd want people in their boundaries, their country's boundaries or kingdom's boundaries. They'd want them trained to know what they're doing. They don't want people just out there just hunting livestock, or you know, what if they had what if their horses were out there and they just let them run wild? They didn't have stables yet, maybe, and they'd collect them up. They'd let them graze because they're, you know, it's desert, so they'd let them graze wherever, and then they'd go round them up when they needed them. And they didn't want people, you know, people out there in the wild shooting their horses that they used for, like, you know, for maybe for rounding up people. So, you know, maybe all these things you see have changed. Where prisoners working, you know, because you know, they used to make prisoners work. Nowadays they're just having them work in the prison, but maybe they just shackled them together because they were prisoners, you know, war crime, or not war crimes, but crimes, and force them to work instead of just sit in a dungeon. You know, what's good is feeding them. Might as well feed them, have them work. If they're gonna, you know, teach them, maybe they just thought work was the thing to make everybody strong and right. And then people, once you did your 10, you know, you served your time in the central city, not you know, you lived your time in the central city or Memphis or wherever it was, and then you would be allowed to go. Maybe you got a stamp. Maybe I don't know what, you know. Maybe they branded you or something like that, and uh, to know that you had worked there, and that was your thing. And people would say, "Oh, that's probably you were a slave. You know, you work like." And then the slavery, it probably wasn't slavery. It was just they wanted a work ethic, and the only slaves were, you know, war prisoners and prisoners of crimes. And so, and they were just working. They were just serving their time. And if they were captured, you know, if they were proved to be maybe they wanted to become citizens or whatever, they'd have to prove it in their allotted time that they were forced to live in the city. And maybe it was like the Nazi regime, where they, you know, if there was a farmer next door and, hey, this guy's not farming as good, you know, he's not doing his job, and who knows what they'd do to him. Maybe they'd put him in, you know, that's a soft duty, and then they'd make him do harder work. If they didn't like the soft duty they were assigned, like farming, which, you know, farming compared to, I don't know, dragging stones or working in gold mines, because I mean, it was gold mining. So I mean, if you was in a gold mine, you couldn't see, and you'd be exhausted, and the air and everything else, and the dirt. And yeah, I don't think they had slaves like they show in the movies. Those people are just like, you know, they might have worked them like you know, there wasn't a whole bunch of food, and they worked them hard, and but they didn't say anything about, possibly being encrypted citizens. I mean, not encrypted, but whatever that word is, where you're forced to be citizens. You're found within the boundaries of a country, and now you're forced to be citizens, and you're forced to a work ethic, and you have to uphold it. And then when you serve your time in training, and you do a certain amount of time, say in the city, and then they turn you out, and they just swapped out the city. Yeah, I think that's probably how they did that stuff. And then, of course, if you were a good worker and you worked your way up, you probably stay in the city and whatever. But everybody else was turned out because they want to make sure that the citizenry knew what the work ethic of the country was, and if they wanted to live in the boundaries, they had to keep an ethic. And there's probably people that circled around. There's probably designs. I'm sure you designs of how the people that rallied up people went. Maybe it was like a flower, like they went out there. That way, maybe they go this way this year, this 10 decade, this way this decade, or maybe they did it yearly and they just went out. Maybe they pulled in certain age groups or something like that. They'd went out and they'd pulled in, maybe you'd have to work if you was maybe 20 to 40 years old, and then you knew you was trained and then turned back out into the countryside, and you either got out of the boundaries of Egypt if you didn't want to keep up the work ethic, or because they wouldn't want people just, barbarians and stuff. Maybe they were the anti-barbarians. Wonder what that would be called. Now you got all these antis, but if they were anti-barbarian, they didn't want people just living off their lives, the animals and stuff, because well, if they worshipped animals, they wouldn't want them killing them and stuff like that.